Oh, yeah. Yo, let's do this.
Welcome to the X Cultural Webcast podcast, powered by Vistatec. I'm your host, Michael Asquith, and I want to first thank you for joining today from wherever you are in the world. As 2023 continues to exemplify one certainty, at least, that change is the only constant in life. We all go through so many dramatic, beautiful, and inspiring changes within ourselves, our relationships, and we all interact with the lasting impressions that they leave upon us in different ways. In 2006, actually, within a 24-hour period in a snowy January Chicago, I found myself going, I was actually this evening at a Chicago Bulls game with some friends, to finding myself within 24 hours on a plane and trip with some friends, where I joined them on a trip to Buenos Aires and San Carlos de Bariloche in Argentina. If you've ever experienced Bariloche in Patagonia, it is nothing but clear lakes, mountains, and forests, of course, as far as the eyes could see. It was there, and no joke, I was on a horse riding with gauchos up on a mountain where there's absolutely no population around, and myself and close friends were I remember distinctly on the horse riding up the mountain, and I realized then and there how small my problems were and how experiences can lead to discovery. Today's program was inspired by my featured guest, who I'm very honored to introduce to everyone today. He is the author of the #1 international bestseller, Transform Through Travel, Connecting Across Cultures. Robert Maisel, are you present?
I am present, and I am grateful for your presence as well. Thank you, Michael and Vistatec, for having me on here. It's an honor to be your guest today.
Yes, it's great to have you, and it's only fitting that you'd be broadcasting. I mean, there's a fictitious background there, but in reality, you are in Mexico right now. Is that correct?
Yes, and I figured I'd throw on the beach background. Of course, I'm not actually in a city that has these fabulous beaches. It's not known for these beaches right now, but seeing as it was a Mexico-style background, I did figure I would put that up.
It's perfect. Thanks everyone for joining today. Since we have a lot to unpack, Robert, I wanted to dive right into exploring global mindset via global travel. And so beginning with, from fear comes discovery. And at the beginning of your book, you talk about individualism, and a common theme throughout your book is overcoming fears and how that often leads to discovery. Fortunately, I've had the opportunity to interact a lot with global peeps every day, and at various stages of their careers across a variety of different industry verticals, including graduate students at MIS, which is Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, who are just to start their careers working in global business and whatnot. And I'm just curious, I find that confidence, when I speak to them, and I speak to a lot of others, is part of the fear that holds them back. And us in general, what are your thoughts, and what do you tell those you consult, and what do you tell yourself when you decided to dive into transforming through travel?
Sure, that's a great question, Michael. And, as you mentioned, confidence is so important in our lives. And a lot of times, a lack of confidence can be what holds us back. My approach, and what I tell the folks that I consult is, when it comes to confidence, just do it. Like they said, like Nike's slogan, right? Just do it. Just go ahead and go out and do it. You are more capable of doing and achieving things in this world than you could even imagine. And that goes for you, Michael, that goes for everyone at Vistatec, that goes for everyone listening, and that goes for everyone who will listen in the future. And I think a lot of times we get stuck in this mode of, I don't know if I can do it. The reality is we can. We just need to remember that we can, and take the plunge and take action to move it forward. And that's how I handle that issue.
Yeah, no, that's great, Robert. And I like that answer. But at the same time, when you made that determination. Like I know in the book you spoke specifically about going on a trip, I believe, with a friend traveling throughout the United States, and that gave you, it was almost like your prequel to global travel. And what made you overcome, I guess, the anxiety and that fear to take that leap? Because I remember, of course, my first overseas travel experience.
Yeah, when it comes to taking the leap, you know, I visualized and I thought about how amazing and transformative the experience would be, and I knew that it was the right choice. So, you know, going into the road trip, there was some nerves, and there was another incident with a Euro trip I had with a buddy who canceled last minute, and that was really nerve-wracking, right? Because I was expecting to have a partner in crime, and then I found out that if I decided I would go, there would in fact be a partner in crime, and it would be myself. So, you know, I think just knowing and understanding that, you know, fear still comes up, like these feelings, I think for everybody still come up, but just knowing to push through them, and knowing that, you know, I don't know if you've heard this before, but fear stands for false evidence appearing real. And basically that's generally what it is. Our minds invent all these different things and ways things could happen, and things could get all messed up. But when you really go out and do it, my experience has been none of that stuff really happens, and really the experiences are life-changing.
Yeah, 100%. I've heard it's like 90% imagination, right? So there are a variety of reasons people fear those different than themselves, from losing one's cultural identity, if showing openness to learn, you know, about another sometimes is perceived as wasteful or in some kind of strange way. New ideas and perspectives are shot down, and sometimes people don't even care enough to open their minds in those situations to new ideas and perspectives. You also speak in your book about communication being from the heart and not letting fear take over. And I agree that a little vulnerability and effort goes a long way, especially when you show genuine interest and respect towards someone else. But what if that isn't the scenario, and you are met with hostility of ignorance, whether it being yourself or on behalf of someone else?
That's a great question. And since we're still on the topic of fear, I just want to touch on one more point. I think just to let everyone else, everyone in the audience know, it's totally normal to feel that, right? And if we can use that fear to propel us forward, rather than letting it hold us back, that's always a great way to look at and use fear as a benefit. Now, to your current question here about what happens if an interaction with someone of another culture, or a situation you're not so familiar in turns hostile, right? Or turns out to be not what you expected. Keep calm and carry on, right? That's my general motto. And I'll give you a quick example. I remember I was in Havana, Cuba, walking down the streets, and you know, there was a gentleman who was clearly unhappy with me, and I hadn't done anything, right? I think somehow he figured out I was American. He was saying some stuff in Spanish, which I couldn't fully understand because of the level of his intoxication with alcohol, Michael. However, there was a clear understanding on my part that he wasn't particularly happy that I was in the country. But just a smile and a wave can change someone's day and can change someone's life. And so by me reacting in that way, a smile and a wave and just moving along, you know, I will never fully understand or know the impact of that effect, but I can tell you that it is a lot more beneficial than had I turned around and started slinging all kinds of curse words in Spanish at this gentleman.
No, 100%. Always taking the high road. So let's talk about learning through experience. And you talk about exponential learning. And of course, for the audience, you can make fun of me a little bit with my spelling error, but it actually tied a little bit to this situation as we were preparing, right? So, and talking about this concept, but exponential learning, which is also learning through reflection on doing or hands-on. You can point to this in your book. Could you tell us a little bit more about exponential learning? Thank you.
Sure. So, I understood and learned that, all throughout my life, I had different learning experiences thus far, and I still continue to have them every day. What I mean is, we were sort of categorized, and we could say in school, at the workplace, in the real world. And I always felt like experiences that I had through travel, particularly, however, in the real world, were so powerful because it was like a full-on experience with the five senses. So for me, this idea of experiential learning, of learning through your experiences, has always been super powerful. And during our discussion, actually led the way to this idea of exponential learning, because I believe that, really through experience, when you're using all five senses, these memories are then ingrained into your mind with those five senses, and you experience the culture, the history, whatever you're doing. There's this own snapshot that's now in your mind and your memories, and that leads to exponential learning, as you're saying, because then you have that image, that memory, and you can reflect back on it, and you've learned in a very different way than, say, through a book or a television program, which, by the way, I think are also great ways to learn. I've just personally seen that learning through experience seems to be a deeper, it resonates deeper inside, like with the soul. There's something that happens when you experience something that goes beyond a level of reading or listening and these things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And on that, I guess this is the reminder to myself and to a lot of folks out there, I think, is, and you mentioned this in your book as well, as staying present. I struggle with that myself sometimes. And I think that in itself, when you're on those or having those experiences, that will then have a much deeper meaning for yourself. So, thank you for that, Robert, as well. So you also mentioned professional versus personal growth. And I've more and more, as I kind of get older, I feel like the two are one and the same. What is your general feeling about that? And, you do kind of distinctly say within the book, this is something that really helped me in business, which is sure, that's the application. And then there's other times in the book where you can tell it's more personal and you're growing. But could you tell us more a little bit about those?
Absolutely. And Michael, that's a great question. And I'm grateful that you went through the book and are able to pick out these great questions, because you're right. I do go through and I put it into professional growth and personal growth. But you make a great point, and especially since the pandemic came and a lot of folks started working from home and working remotely, I think we have seen a blurring of the line between personal and professional. And so I would agree that while I put them into two different categories, of each of which, each let's say characteristic I put in each one was where I felt it most appropriate in my own personal life, they certainly merge. Let's take gratitude, for example. You can certainly learn gratitude on a personal level through a travel experience by coming into contact with a group of people or a culture that clearly has a lot less economically than you do. But you can then apply that to the workplace, and you can be grateful for your job, the ability to support your family. All these flexibility could be another great example, right? You learn based on a travel arrangement that doesn't go quite as planned, how to be a more flexible person. And in turn, because you are a more flexible person, you're able to apply it to your work and be more flexible with requests from your boss or from your coworkers.
100%. And I think, that had me think, and you mentioned the pandemic, for somebody like yourself who is traveling right now and has traveled on these extended long trips to different continents. I'm very curious, how did the pandemic impact you specifically, and what did you do to, especially somebody free-spirited as yourself, to process that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Michael. Up until that point, when the pandemic hit, I had been, doing a lot of this travel. I had been doing a lot of this long-term travel. And we came to a point during the beginning of the pandemic and through the heart of it, really, that we couldn't, right? Everyone was stuck at home. Nobody was going on airplanes. Countries were imposing, and some still have, but the majority have loosened or dropped, right? But were imposing these travel restrictions. So I was in a situation where I couldn't operate the way that I normally was, right? So I said to myself, this is the perfect time to transition into, continuing to travel when I can down the line, but transitioning into sharing this knowledge with people who need to hear my story. And that was the impetus behind getting the book published, right? Writing the physical book, getting the ebook done, recording the audiobook, and really putting into place sort of my professional life and focus on how I can really share my experiences through travel to help others fulfill their dreams and have these amazing travel experiences as well. Because I know that if I can do it, so can you. And you is everyone watching.
Yeah, 100%. And I really do like the positive message behind that, because I think all of us, of course, went through a lot during that period, are still in some way, shape, and form dealing with some of that, the aftermath of that in our own personal lives as well. So, and then a lot of us had to adapt, because, example, in global business, I was in the same boat somewhat as you, in the sense that it was hard to meet people face to face, and all the other things that went into it. I also mentioned to you during this time, and then we kind of joked a little bit about this, but you refuted. This was my investigative journalism attempt, but I was and you're laughing now, but you said that during the book that you were ill for this extended period of time, getting on a flight to go to France. And I know that you were, I believe, in Miami, and the hotel, you were ill with some virus, and I believe it was in 2019. And then I asked you kind of point blank, like, was that COVID, or do you think that was COVID during that time? Because it kind of matched up a little bit, but you've refuted, and I will no longer be an investigative journalism on that front. In any case, so we've got exposure to culture, language, and beautiful people. And that really is what you gain so much of while you're going through your travels. And I like to believe that I'm infinitely curious. And this is another theme in your book, being curious. Is this a prerequisite to overcoming the fear of another culture and or experience that you have with another culture in its purest form?
That's a great question, Michael. I would say, yeah, it's one of the things that's so important, really, for people to be curious, because I think that's what would get them out into the world anyway, to be exploring and to be looking for these experiences. Meeting people of new cultures who speak a different language, to learn new things about the world, about where they live. And I think it is extremely helpful in overcoming that fear, because rather than letting fear stop you, your curiosity propels you forward. Hey, what can I learn? What am I gonna be able to come away with, and how can I share my culture and my language with these folks? So I do think it's a great way to use that curiosity to propel people forward, to knock that fear out, and go have these experiences they've always been curious about.
Yeah, and you had so many great stories and these deep connections, and you reference a lot of these relationships that you built as family. And I'm just curious, and that you have this duty to be very supportive to them, like family, emotionally, mentally, and all those things, because of how they treated you as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, I've just felt like the further I go here in this lifetime, I understand that, from my perspective, family, like blood related, I think is a wonderful thing that we're born into this lifetime with. And we should do everything we can to preserve those relationships. And as I've gone on further, I've learned that even more, to me, family seems to extend beyond just blood relationships and bloodlines, and more into really those who those who you connect with, and that can be people of any culture, right? I've got my host family in Argentina from when I studied abroad. They're still my host family from Argentina. I've been back a few times to visit. I've traveled Argentina with my host father. Since then, my during my MBA, one of my buddies, one of my fellow classmates is from Brazil, so spent time down in Brazil in his house, and his family became basically family to me. And just to make a quick clarifying point, Michael, so people here don't think I'm crazy.
Yep.
It's a two-way street, right? I'm calling them mom or dad, they're calling me their son. So it's not like you can tell that the relationship is real and is genuine, and when that happens, that's when I do consider people family.
I love the loyalty in the way that you wrote about them, and it also has me. And I think I'm aware of this fact, and as I was reading through the book, I'm like, how many countries were you traveling in these extended periods of time? I know that there's on your profile, there's a list of how long some of these trips were, where you lived abroad, and that in some cases you were with tribes and had experiences learning about all types of cultural things that I just find extremely fascinating. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of that? That would be awesome. I think that the audience would love to hear more about that.
Sure. Well, Michael, touching on a couple of these points, I think I've been really fortunate to have visited 56 countries at this point, and it's quite an honor. It's a pleasure and an honor always to learn, to arrive at a new place, interact with new people, and come away with an experience of just learning about the rituals, about what they do, but also, about why they do it. And I think it's so interesting. I've always been curious, and then to share my perspective with them is always fun as well. You may remember the story in the book about the jumping with the Maasai, and I just found that was so interesting. So went down to do a safari in Kenya, and had the wonderful opportunity to interact with the Maasai people from Masai Mara, and just going through a little bit of an understanding, meeting the people, learning more about their life was just such a fascinating thing, right? Because here they are living in such a different situation, kind of out in the open plains, where here I am living in New York City with all this technology. It's just really fascinating.
Yeah, and was it the Maasai people where they were very much around lions? Was that and
Yeah.
there was this smell that you felt like they like, there were the Maasai people even said the lions kind of leave them alone, so to
Oh
speak, or
yeah.
something along
They
those lines.
know. They know if
Yeah,
there's a Maasai walking about around, and they're not going to mess with them, because there's a mutual respect between the Lion Kingdom and the Maasai people, which I found really fascinating. How nature works, and how people of different species continue to interact and have respect for one another.
yes. So shifting a little, just talking more about the professional side, I guess, of development and growth. And I'm thinking, for instance, in Japanese culture, it's common to read between the lines, picking up on that discomfort. There's this low context, simple, which is more American, and then you've got this high context way of speaking and communicating. And saying what you mean and meaning what you say. What did you learn about unconscious shared knowledge across cultures?
Sure. So like you said, you have these differences between low context cultures and high context cultures, right? Yeah, it's so interesting, right? High context just tell you everything. Low context, you have to figure it out for yourself. And it's just the idea that people interact so differently. But what I can say is this unconscious shared knowledge, right? Of everybody. What did I learn about just people in general. So that's a great
Yeah.
point. I
Is there,
saw through. Oh,
go
go ahead.
go ahead. No,
I was good.
I was just gonna ask you about the conveying of the messages that are not communicated, but are more body versus, verbal.
Oh yeah, let me come right to that. Let me
Okay. But yeah,
so
sorry.
so no, it's all good. So the idea is, I think through all these cultures, I saw and learned that we all have the same basic needs, although we have different ways of expressing. Cultures have different ways of expressing people's behaviors, actions, thoughts, and different rituals. But at the end of the day, we are all human beings. We all have the same basic needs. We all need shelter. We all need to have food, water. People want to procreate and have families. These are similar across all cultures. So I think this kind of unconscious shared knowledge, as you were asking about before, what I tended to see was that although there's so many differences on the outside, when I was able to really see through the reasons for the rituals and why people are doing these things and what are their basic needs, it's the same across cultures and people.
Yes. And how did this make you change your approach when either living or visiting a new country or culture as you started to acquire the knowledge about all these different cultures?
I think really having that understanding that everybody is the same in the inside just made me a more humbled and respectful person, continuing on the curiosity highway, if you will, but understanding that, hey, everybody has their own situation that they're going through, but at the end of the day, you know, there are needs that people have. And I want to touch upon the question that you asked before, just about some of the subtle, maybe some of the, how would you figure something out if it wasn't explicitly stated, right? The idea of verbal and verbal communication and facial expressions and things. I like to tell a story about when I first got to Japan, the idea of, I thought everybody, I came to understand that it wasn't really a no, like nobody would really say no to me. So they would say like, right? And I came to later understand that that meant kind of like more of an, I've heard you, not necessarily a yes. So I remember trying to make plans at one point with some of my friends, and I said, "Do you guys want to go to? Do you want to go to the movies?" And from that point, I started to learn that there are these kind of three levels of no, or three levels of answering. So like a very enthusiastic. To me, I took it as like, okay, like that's like a really good chance that that's a yes. Definitely nothing guaranteed, but that's like a pretty good chance. They're like, like a little brief one like that, it's kind of like, that's probably a no. And then there's like the like the concerned, hesitated one. That's like oh heck to the beep, no.
Yeah. Nice. Nice. Yeah, no, and that's kind of now this reprogramming, because this was almost a reprogramming of sorts. Did you go into this knowing this, or was it more like, I'm going to dive in, receive the information, and then try to process it through my understanding of that information to then adapt culturally to the situation?
Yeah, it was more, that's a great question, Michael. It was more like a dive straight in and figure it out. I will say that before moving to Japan, I did, it was the final stop on my learning experience in Asia. So I planned to spend, month and a half there, ended up spending 3, was just fascinated by this place. And I knew I needed to come back. So yeah, I had those couple months of exposure, but I kind of just dove right in with the experience, and rather than like doing extensive research, though I tend to research as well. And a quick point for our audience, just as I'm thinking about it, if anyone is thinking about moving to a new place, especially with this working remote world kind of environment, I always would recommend, if possible, if you can go without a work visa, go on your own for a little while and feel it out. Do more than a tourist trip, like do more than just like 3 or 4 days to see all the tourists. Go see the tourist stuff, but give yourself a week to a month, even 2 months if you can, and then see how life would actually be there. Because I always think it's better to feel it out first, before maybe just moving to a place, if you have the option.
And in Japan too, and that's awesome, Robert. I think that's great. It's great advice. And if anybody needs to ask Robert anything, I'm sure he'd field your questions not only after this, but also anytime. And but I know when you were living in Japan specifically, you were teaching, I believe, was it English and or something, and you also had people that you were working with, others that you were interacting with, and just everything in between. And I'm just wondering, and then I know that didn't you go and you learned Japanese, or at least enough of it to start to really resonate there. Can you tell us a little bit about how this is in that global, because this will lead into global mindset and growth, which is next.
Hi, Nihongo shaberemasu yo, Michael. Michael, they would call you. So, yeah, I learned to speak the language, and it made such a drastic impact, and I just felt like, for me, I'm fortunate because I've always been a curious person, and I've been curious about cultures, and what goes in tandem with the cultures a lot of times is the language, right? Because there's a huge component to someone's culture. So for me, I always felt that it was easier for me to better understand people if I spoke their language too. And this continues today, right? It's still in the present tense. If I speak your language, I can probably understand you better than if I can't. Now, we have tools today, technological things such as translators, which I think are also a great tools to use. But I think when you really speak someone's language, it really it facilitates a different and a deeper level of communication.
Absolutely. And how it's received by them, that respect that they provide back to you, just like to dispel the American, thought thinking about Americans, of course, right? Which there's that we could have a whole podcast on that alone, how Americans are perceived overseas. But I'm just curious, like, that helps to show that you're more open, that you're not somebody who's not invested in living there and meeting them and getting to know their culture and their people. Is that correct?
Absolutely, Michael. Right. So I think alongside this more genuine communication that is put into place when learning a language, you're right. The curiosity and the openness to learning a new language not only opens up new doors professionally, personally, all that, but really shows the group of people where you are, like you said, that you're open to, willing and happy to interact with them on a personal level, on a professional level, if you're working there.
Yes. And this transitions to global mindset and growth. You talk about going against your own cultural norms, such as how you found your real self as a vegetarian, and more, you became educated on things like animal rights. I know that you told a story about a monkey and seeing the abuse, and that also made you rise up to the occasion in those types of situations. These were things that were acquired, so to speak, as you went through your own journey and educated yourself. These real life interactions before coming to the conclusions on some things like traveling as well, as far as where to go, where not to go. We talked a little bit about that in the past, which I think you had a really good thought on this. As you have your own unique global travel experiences, assuming, of course, that you are fortunate enough to do so, does exposure to culture, people, and places lead to more global of a viewpoint, focus on learning, awareness, and growth, and having those interpersonal relationships of varying types? Because in theory, you're able to understand cultural perspective, various methods of conflict resolution, etc. Would you say that this is the case, and would this be defining global mindset, or how do you think about this and how it impacts your global perspective?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, I would agree with that, Michael. I'd say the more places you visit, languages you learn, cultures you learn about and interact with, the more global your mindset becomes. If, here's the caveat, of course, you need to be open to it. I mean, there are some people who might go to a place and, if you only eat the food you know, if you only interact with people you know, and you don't really end up diving in too far, I think the exposure would be more limited in that case than someone who really gets into it with the local people, tries their best to have a conversation in the local language and so forth. But I do think that these global experiences absolutely assist in building a very powerful global mindset that is able to incorporate not just, of course, one perspective, the one that we grew up with so that we know and learned, but many other ways of solving problems, many other ways of doing things. And I think that's one of the most powerful and eye-opening things of travel, is it shows you that no matter what country you come from, the operating system that you were programmed with is not the only operating system there is. It is one. It is probably effective. It works in your country. It may not work in another country. But what happens is when you have this global perspective, I think we touched upon it a little bit in the book. I look at it like a menu. You have one thing on the menu, basically, when you're born. You know one way of operating. You may learn subsects, let's say, sub-operating principles, if you will. We're going with the coding. But when you go to other countries and other places, you really start to gain other perspectives, and therefore you have more things on the menu. So every time a situation arises, you then have all these different options on the menu, if you will, or tools that you can use to handle the situation.
Hashtag think global. I dig it. So that transitions great to authenticity and connection. And I think this is, an area where in business, I think it's so important to have real, genuine relationships with people that you work with, people that you're trying to work with, in every single situation, period. And that you retain that genuine self as you go, and that in itself establishes trust when you see that in another and you're treated that way, and whatnot. What are your thoughts about this globalness, so to speak, and authenticity and connection, and how it gears you up for those things to be a bit deeper and a little bit more defined within yourself?
Sure. Well, let's hone in on authenticity for a moment, and then we'll expand it to global. I'd say with authenticity, I think it's an interesting topic, because it's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I think a lot of people kind of see things, let's say in the media, or they see things and something's not working for them, they try it. I think the best way to look at authenticity is to see, when you're interacting with people, when you're acting, when you're thinking, is it a good fit for you, right? Does it feel real? Because I think sometimes we try to be a certain way, or, we want people to like us, so we act a certain way. But, I've just personally found that, having tried that approach too and seen things, ultimately in the long term, it really just doesn't work very well. What really works is just being yourself. Ultimately, whatever you're trying to accomplish, whatever you want, will come your way if you're real with people, because I think it's an intuitive thing that people sense. Now, expanding that to the global mindset, right? I think that carries into the global mindset and global travel, because when you are really yourself, you're able to, you're not afraid of some, some lie, or, so that you told coming back to haunt you, or you're not afraid that someone's going to uncover the real you, because you're being the real you. So I think your ability to be authentic, just deciding that you're going to be authentic, that's what really brings down the barriers and allows people, as you were saying before, vulnerability, and especially across cultures. If you're going to be vulnerable and authentic with people, they will also in turn be so with you. That's been my experience.
I agree with that. And I think it just, for some reason, makes me think of, I don't have to, there's a quote from, I can't remember what author, but they say, like, I don't need to remember anything because I don't lie. You know what I mean? And so when you're not yourself, it's freeing. I mean, when you are yourself, it's freeing. When you're not yourself, then you've got to sit there and constantly rethink and adjust, and you're kind of living this, little lie. So yeah, I think it shows you, I think it gave me at least a little bit more confidence in myself, traveling a bit and having a lot of experiences throughout my life in that sense. So I really liked that part of the book, especially. So I wanted to, we're running a little short on time, so I will want to kind of plow through some things a little bit. So we'll do a little bit of double time if you don't mind. But
Sure.
I talk about cross-cultural communications and personalization. And it's a huge topic, especially in global business with global brands and a lot of the people that are who would be listening to this podcast now and in the future. So, I wanted to talk about this concept with personalization, increasing, with user experience and customer experience, and what how you've seen that, or in maybe situations within products or brands that are out there, and maybe it shows some loyalty to certain things that have resonated well with you because of your openness to those types of things.
Sure, that's a great topic to touch on here, Michael. So I think the idea of cross-culturally communicating and personalizing things for people based on culture, it's so important because people, as we said, people all have the same basic needs, but the ways that these needs are expressed are different, and the way that people communicate are different, and the ways that the tastes, the preferences that people have. So the first thing that comes to mind as an example has been just going to a well-known chain here in the States, McDonald's. Every time I've just checked them out abroad, it's really interesting because now, granted, as you mentioned before, I'm a vegetarian, so keep in mind there's a lot on the menu that I'm not going for, but in some countries like India, there are. So, and that has to do with the personalization and that understanding of the culture. And I think McDonald's has been intelligent, very intelligent in that, from what I've seen, just personal experience, in that they provide, the clientele, the menu is always different. It maintains the McDonald's feel. It's still fast food wherever you go, but they've got it's in accordance with the local culture, the foods that they serve, because they know that if they serve something in one culture that is just, it's not going to be that people would say, what is this? Of course, they have to serve things that people know and like.
Yes, like the McLobster, right?
McLobster.
So, yeah, they do. They do have a McLobster in Canada. I've had it actually. So personalization too, with culture and tech is a hot subject right now, just because there is a lot of nuances, and there's ways to a lot of concern now with AI and marginalizing certain folks and cultures that might not be privy to some of these tech things that we are, that we are exposed to. How do you think this kind of impacts DEI and cultural norms and things like that?
So just to clarify, Michael, are you talking about like people's ability to access technology and how it affects DEI?
Yeah, I think it's all of to me, this is all kind of grouped together. And it's almost, I've said before, like multilingual accessibility, or just like there's accessibility. And so, but yeah, along those lines, with DEI being more inclusive with the language, general neutrality, et cetera.
Sure. Well, I think for one, it's a challenge for those folks who may be in a spot that don't have strong internet or reliable internet or connectivity, to be able to have access to the same resources that others may have. In the terms of like DEI and just the language dispersion, I think what you see is the fact that now that we have access to all these translation tools and everything, I think that now that messages can be spread into all these different languages, it is a wonderful thing, because it does allow us to be more diverse, more equitable, and more inclusive, because we can get the message to, let's say a company can do marketing, get the message out to folks in a different area that they might not have been able to do, and can therefore attract a different audience, right? With the message being sent into people's native tongue. If there are job openings that can be done remotely, these folks can be picked up, and from different cultures, because there's that sort of that idea that we can get the language into their native tongue. So I do think it is really it's interesting that the increase in technology is really allowing us to be more diverse, equitable, and inclusive.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I think that's right on and fantastic. So transitioning, because we're a little bit double timed, is purpose-driven living. So how have any of these types of experiences added dimension and purpose to your work, life, empathy, and understanding towards others, and to suspend the priority of our own needs while being open to listen and learn, even against our own cultural norms that are instilled within us? So again, from your perspective, how are these things impacted? Because you talk very much in get out there, do this, like get up now to to take advantage of life as you can, and do it with some conviction and purpose. So could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. I mean, there was one event that stands out in my mind, and I'll mention it briefly, but we can talk more if we have time, and if we don't, we can skip it. But I had basically, long story short, I had an incident in Argentina where I thought, oh my goodness, my life could be at stake here. And I basically, while being held at gunpoint, and potentially seeing the end of my life flash before my eyes, I say, you know what? I better start living my life today like there's no tomorrow. And I think the difference here is that we talk about learning in different ways. I had seen that quote for sure before, right? Yeah, like the motivation, like live life like there's no tomorrow. And I think a lot of us have seen that and may, think that that's a great quote. But when you're actually put in a situation where that could be your fate, you then have a different understanding. You have experienced that. So then you really understand what it means to live life like there's no tomorrow. With that in mind, having had that experience, I knew that I was always curious about cultures, languages. I wanted to propel myself forward and see as much as I possibly could, right? So I knew that my purpose has something to do with travel, languages, cultures, learning, and sharing. And I better just get on that rocket ship and start blasting off right now, because you decide today, now, that you want to do something, and that's when you should go for it.
Yeah, I love that. And you had that crazy story with that. I suggest everybody to pick up his book. It's available on Amazon, Audible. I listened to the audio version, which Robert actually did the voiceover, and I felt way more personally connected to the book because of that. So I think it was an interesting situation to have the author do the voiceover. I personally like that. And I really, really appreciate, Robert, you being here today. I think that the whole global community out there needs to know about you and embrace these concepts, because they have so much great overlap into so many things within business, but also personal development and growth in life. So thank you so much, Robert. I wanted to close with while I was doing some research, I came across like an image, and I just thought of, and I started researching for some reason, Thai lantern festivals and just what they mean. And I thought it was just kind of a good way to go out, because as I understand it after reading, in northern Thailand and other areas, these are used to release these lanterns to have your problems drift away. So I wanted to leave on a high note. Thanks once again for coming today. And I think, again, I think we'll have the QR code up on our website. So if anybody is looking for your book, and also, as I said, I recommend the Audible version for dog walkers like myself, that need to get outside their heads sometimes. I think it's a great, fun book. Thank you so much, Robert, once again. Really appreciate it. And I think we're good to close. Thank you to my marketing team and to my team at Vistatec. Cheers, all.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Vistatec. Thank you, everyone who attended.
Oh, yeah. Yo, let's do this.
Now place your homie rolling.